I know Christmas is past. I know we're in the new year. Look, the wise men, the earliest that, at least from my perspective, they could have come would have been when Jesus was about 4 months old, 3 or 4 months old. I think that's the earliest. The latest, I believe, was when he was a year and 3 or 4 months old, and that doesn't mean that's correct. But he was definitely not in the birthing area. He was definitely a young child. Scriptures make it clear he was a young child. He was in a house, and that's where the wise men or magi came. So there was some time. So if you'll give me the grace of a little bit of time, that visit was not immediately in the nativity scene when Jesus was born, and hope. And I want to talk about hope. I want to start by telling you 2 stories. One very, very short that you've heard in different dimensions. One that you have not heard. And the one that you have heard, it's a bridge off of the testimony that Teresa gave this morning, and somewhat the phrase that the daughter said when her son said that Nana, or Teresa, Teresa, his grandmother, she's changed, and at least by what I heard, and Teresa said that her daughter said back to her son, no, she's not changed, we've changed. A third story that I hadn't intended to tell right here. I woke up 2 days ago, and I was going over in my mind a circumstance that I am dealing with and have for some time period that I've been pretty put out, bugged by this circumstance, and wondering why this circumstance doesn't end, or why it's like it is, and what's wrong, and just unappreciating the moment, and all of my focus was on the circumstance, and why doesn't the circumstance change, and this is influencing me, and it's both uncomfortable, and it's just, I wouldn't say, it's just difficult in some dimensions. And why doesn't it change? And when I woke up a couple of mornings ago, the thought was clear as a bell in my thinking, that it's very probable that this whole thing is about me, not the circumstance, it's about me. That's what the deal is. And the circumstance is persisting because what needs to be done in me is not taking place yet. And the problem is not the circumstance. God is addressing something benevolently in my own life. And we're being raised in a culture right now where it's somebody else's fault. Somebody else, and we are entitled to everything we want, when we want, the way we want, as much as we want. And I don't want to work, and if I have to work, I want a really good job that I get terrific pay, and I can go in when I want to, and I don't have to work when I don't want to. That's the culture in which our culture is, and the government will take care of everybody and everything. That's what we're being raised in. And so the idea that God might be addressing something in my own life and I'm the problem, or it's something that needs to be adjusted in me for me to continue to step into and fulfill His purposes. It's not just to bash me up, or it's not just to, you're not perfect yet. And sometimes, we can be so hard. I was putting up lights the last couple of days, and I got to the last 2, and I had to put them in a rather small area, and there were 2 of them. I took a fluorescent fixture down, putting 2 small ones up, and as I looked at them, every time I looked at the holes, they just looked so different. They weren't even. They weren't the right distance from the back and the front. It was discouraging, depressing to me, because it wasn't perfect. So finally, I said, I got to take a nap, and so I took a nap, and when depressed, take a nap. So I took a nap, and I was complaining to Faye. These don't line up. I mean, I wanted them to be perfect. And I don't know if she said, well, did you measure them? And so I put the ladder up, and I measured it. And one from the front was 7.5 inches, and the other from the front was 7.25 inches. And I took a while and did the deductions. So I spent some time with Gene Beffrey and the professor trying to add it up. And I came to they're only 1/4 inch off. Big deal. So here we go. So I was driving on the property, and I had a circumstance that I was dealing with for years, long running, just as what Teresa, the current episode that she talked about was 2 years running, or back in 2012, could be 2.5, could be close to 3. Was many years running. And there were different times that I considered, maybe I'm not doing what I should be doing. Maybe I shouldn't even be a pastor. Maybe This is just not right. And this is affecting me. And who wants this? Sometimes you look at them, forget this. You're above it. You understand? You're above that kind of problem to deal with. You're better. Who am I to have to deal with this? I'll show. And as I drove on the hill, drove past that pillar, this was years ago, 7, 8 years ago, I heard so clear in my mind this statement. The reason this circumstance, this is a modification of the statement, it's as close as possible. The reason the circumstance is still here is because you need it. That was such a life changer for me. And in an instant, I knew the interpretation of that declaration. That's only happened to me a couple of times where I felt like I had an instant understanding. And the understanding was that I was so weak that God needed to permit that to occur in my life. And through it, I would become stronger. And it was beneficial. It was benevolent. Even though there were many times I moaned and groaned about it. It was benevolent. I certainly on different occasions didn't look at it and say, this is benevolent. This is a loving act of a loving God. He's trying to help me. I'm so weak. He's giving me something that strengthens me. So I've had many conversations with Mike Rich. Mike knows I'm sharing this story. I have his permission. I've had many conversations with Mike, and as a concerned father, one of his concerns, he has 5 children. One of them is on her way soon to Ukraine, and there's 4 that live in the area. 2 of the boys are Michael is about to graduate from college. Zeke has another year. And as any parent would be, he's concerned about their future and what are they going to do and job. And Mike told me, he said, don't paint me out to be better than I really am. So on some occasions, he was in the mullygrubbies, and some occasions he was worrying, and some occasions he was fretting. Okay, so he's not perfect, right? Right, okay, so there I painted him as not perfect. You understand? Sometimes he was fretting and in the mullygrubs. And he was talking about Michael, who's about to graduate. And through the years, I've had different conversations, and I understood his own job history, and I've understood my job history. This all relates to the message. Just try and hang. So I met with him, and again, he was talking about the things that were weighing on him that were real difficult. And I ventured the risk. Friends are like swords, sharpening swords. Sometimes, in order to sharpen them, there's got to be a little friction. If you clang them together, side to side, so there's no friction, there's no sharpening. If you whack them together like that, you just dull them and chip them. There's no sharpening. But if you rub them against each other where there's a little bit of friction, then you can sharpen them. So the goal is not to hurt one another and plow into them, not clanging the swords together, and not having no friction. If there's never any friction, any rubbing, any addressing things, there's no sharpening. But sharpening requires some of that. And I said, come on, Mike, you need to remember your own job history. Now here's his job history. Mike has a very excellent job right now. He is, and he won't say this, he's not perfect, but he's a very high-level programmer of rotating equipment analysis, and he's very good at starting from scratch and writing a whole program, and he's certified at about, I think one step higher, he's certified at about the highest level that you can get in rotational equipment analysis. And I mean, he's an expert. He is among a very few, if you take the whole world, that may be 500,000 in the world, maybe in that category. That's pretty tall cotton. Would you agree? Yes. So his job history started this way. He was installing trailer hitches at U-Haul on Clinton Highway. And church was a part of his life, and he told his employer, I want to go to church on Sundays. And he was told, well, you'll have to work one Sunday a month. The other 3 you can go to church. Okay. So he was trying to be happy and install trailer hitches. That means you crawl under cars and you're installing trailer hitches and rust drops down in your eyes. And And it didn't take too long. I won't have all the dates and times exactly right. It didn't take too long, and one Sunday grew into two. 2 Sundays grew into 3 a month. 3 Sundays grew into 4 a month. So the promise of you only have to work 1 Sunday a month and you can go to church the other 3 Sundays didn't take place. Now, what's important to you? Because I have found there are pivot points in our life. And when everything can change, if when the pivot point arrives, you choose the Lord. So, he had this going on the inside of him. They promised me 3 weeks a month I'd be able to go to church. I'm working every week. And you have a chance in those moments to evaluate what's important to you. Because we live in a world that's because of sin and the consequence of sin, the curse that's come, and birthing, bringing forth things into being, there's pain, discomfort. It's a part of the curse, the consequent of sin. Prior to that, in the world that God created, there wasn't pain in bringing forth. It was the creative resources of God Almighty spoke them into being. But because we live in a natural world in which sin is present, there's the birthing, there's the process of birthing and bringing into being, and pain, discomfort is a part of that process. We guys don't understand this in the terms of bringing forth of a child. Every woman in this room who has brought forth a child understands it very well. So he comes to the point where this, from an irritant to significant pressure to somewhere along the line, it grew into, I got to do something about this. It's too important to me to go to church on Sunday. Now, I'm not saying he was the model Christian and everything in his life was hunky-dory, and that's not the point. And eventually came to the point where he decided, I'm just going to have to tell them, if you won't let me have some Sundays off, I'm going to quit. Because that's more important to me. Now, he comes from, every story has a behind-the-scenes story, and the family that he's from, that wasn't well looked upon. You quit and you didn't have another job to go to? That's not very well respected. So he had family culture looking on and knowing, what's my family going to say? They're not going to have very pleasant thoughts about this. I don't have another job. I haven't been looking. I've just tried to resolve what is really important to me. So he eventually went to his employer and said, hey, the deal's up. Either I have time off in order to go to church on Sundays or like what you promised, or I'm going to have to quit. I don't know what the employer said to him, but it was something along the lines of, take your pick, quit, or you'll work when we tell you. So he had to make a decision. He made the decision, I'm going to quit. Because going to church, worshiping God, is more important than anything else. Sometimes you lose sight of those significant pivot points. But things change. Now, God's watching. I love it that God's watching. Now, if you're doing bad and messing around, you don't love that. That's not good news. If you're trying to honor Him, that's really good news. God's watching. He's looking on behalf of those to whom He can show Himself strong. I love that verse. Most of the time, I love that verse. So, Mike said this was before Tanya. He had a date with someone, and it was kind of late, and he didn't want to go home, wherever home was, so he thought, I'll go to my parents. This is going to be 1:30 or 2 in the morning after everything got settled, and they're going to ask how my day was, and I'm going to tell them, well, I quit my job today. And they're going to ask, well, what do you have? Well, I don't have anything. Well, why'd you quit what? You don't do that, Mike. He knew he was going to face something. So he goes. He opens the door. It's 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, see, there are moments that God, sometimes it's a real quick. Sometimes it's a long time, because there's a pivotal thing that he wants us to understand. It's worshiping him, and that it is of him. It's his hand. Worship of him, and it's his hand. And sometimes there's a real quick turnaround. In that house at that time period was a man many of you know, Ken Piety. Ken Piety was talking to his parents, 2 o'clock in the morning. So the conversation quickly went from A to B, and, how was your day? Well, I quit my job. I don't know how it exactly went, but I quit my job today. Why? Because they won't let me go to church. They won't give me Sundays off like they promised me. That's important. It's more important than a job, so I quit. And Ken said to him, again, I wasn't there, said, I'll give you a job. Well, doing what? Ken was a new startup company, sort of, in its early stages. And it was a high-level programming company. And he said, well, we need somebody to carry boxes. And just empty the trash and just package things up. We need somebody to do that. We'll hire you to do that. Okay. So Mike said he did that about a year, just carried boxes, and he was very aggressive, and he got tired. He could carry boxes real quickly, so he had a lot of free time. I got free time. What else do you want me to do? We don't have anything else. Just look busy. Sit and look busy till we have something for you to do. So he decided, I'll start reading manuals. So he started reading manuals on these computers and these programs. And so he spent a long time reading manuals, doing his job, reading manuals, doing his job, reading manuals. Someday, somebody came to him, they're writing programs, they were writing on his hand, and then they need to enter in a computer. It develops this way. So maybe a year of carrying boxes, then some. Would you take this, what I've written, and enter into the computer for me? Or it could have been he asked, hey, could I do that for you? Could I enter that in the computer? And it got to where he was pretty good, and he did a lot of it. Did that for a year or so. Then one day, Ken Piety came to him with an article, and it had a bunch of algorithms. Those of you who understand writing programs, algorithms mean something to you. And they don't to me. And he said, this has got some algorithm. I want you to write the program that this article is talking about. So he did. So he started writing year after year. Led to more knowledge, more questions, more knowledge, more skill, more certification, more knowledge, more skill, more certification. Now he's in probably a group of 500,000 in the world. But what was the pivot point? So as we were talking, I said, Mike, don't lose sight of the pivot point. Yes, you want your kids to have good jobs. I want my kids to have good jobs. But just remember the pathway that you came. You started off, and I'm not belittling it. He started off installing trailer hitches. But you made a decision, not I hate this job, and he may have hated the job. I wouldn't like the rust dropping down into my eyes. But they wouldn't do what they promised me, that I hired on with, that I could go to church at least 3 out of 4 Sundays. And that's a non-negotiable in my life. I said in my own personal story, I was going to go to the Philippines. When I graduated from college, I told Faye, we're going to go to the Philippines. But my education was a little lacking at that time. What Brian offers now is vastly superior. I need to get a master's, and we're going to go to the Philippines. We're going to go to a missionary kids school. That's what we're going to do. That's when she married me. That was her expectation. We were on our way to the Philippines. While I was at UT, they offered me a job back at Bryan. Well, that's unheard of. I went back to Bryan. I had a year of doing that. Scared spitless, but after a year of doing that, I discovered we bought a house. Faye had a job. She was happy. I was happy. All of God's children were happy. We're going to spend the rest of our life being here. After 3 years, we weren't able to have a child. Unhappiness began to set in. And I need to get a PhD. If I'm going to stay in college, I need to get a PhD. So I started a PhD program. We're almost 5 years into marriage. No child. Faye's real unhappy. We moved away from Dayton, started a PhD program. We were introduced to the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Brian didn't like the baptism of the Holy Spirit. They told me you can't come back. So we were stuck here in Knoxville. I'm in a PhD program. The reason I'm in it, So I just finished the program. I finished the program, got a postdoc in cancer research, a botanist in cancer research. Now put that one together. How did that happen? I don't know. How a botanist who studied algae, that's pond scum, how a botanist who studied pond scum got a 2-year postdoc in colon cancer research. Just, you kind of scratch. Now, how did that happen? With God, nothing is what? Impossible. That ran out, and I was building a house. And I decided, I'm going to keep building a house. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to keep building the house. And I discovered a verse in the Bible that says it's a curse to build a house and not live in it. That was part of the curses in Deuteronomy. You'll build a house, they'll build houses, and they won't live in them. It's not talking about contractors or so on. It means they won't live out the permanency of their lifespan in the things that they have provided. They'll build houses, but they won't occupy them. And I saw that it was a curse. I took that personally. I don't want to start a house and not live in it. I don't want the declaration of my life to be a curse. I had 2 job offers during that time period, one from Oral Roberts University, one from a college up in South Dakota. Both of them were great. Both of them I had the chance to declare, it's God, it's my family, it's then my work. Good, we want people like that. But I had a house that I hadn't finished, and there was a promise, and I didn't want my life to be a declaration of a curse, so I turned them both down. For what? A promise. It was a pivot point in my life. In Mike's life, it was a pivot point. I'm going to quit because I got to go to church. Very important pivot points. So when that ran, I just continued to build the house. Well, you can't do that. I know you can't do that. I'm not telling you to do that. So somebody was teaching, had a home Bible study out in Alcoa area. Faye, what's the name of that town? Friendsville. In Friendsville, in a railroad car that was stuck on a skeet gun range. That had no air conditioning. It just had a wide door that was open in the summertime. Every bug known to man. It was the ark. Every bug would fly into there. It's a railroad car. Bugs would fly in. They would fly around. I was there every Tuesday night teaching. This was years ago. They'd give me $200, $300, $400, $500 in an offering for one night. In a bug-filled railroad car on a skeet gun range. I'd take that. It was packed with people, and I took that money, and I bought materials. And I said, God, I'm asking you to give me money or some materials, and I will build to your glory. And from that day, I've never lacked either. Either I had money or I had materials. There were many times I had materials. I had no more money for any more material, but I had materials that I could work with. Then there was an opening. I was at Trinity Chapel and was on the leadership there. And then there was a change. We're going to change how the leadership is done. So I stayed till that change took place. And then God had called me to feed his sheep. I spent 7 years rejecting that. Surely he doesn't mean be a pastor. And I had 7 years grace to make up my mind. Sometimes God will give you lots of grace. I don't believe I have 7-year grace now. I have to be far more instant. But way back then, he let me have 7 years to make the decision. I don't want to teach biology. I don't want to do research. I want to work with people. And from my own life, I knew, well, the journey was here to here, or here, went over here, and I said, Mike, yours is sort of the same way, but there was a pivot point. That's the most important thing you can pass on to your kids, is choose God. To the much that you're willing to lay down everything for that.